Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took over as the leader of the Young Avengers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of chaos, and Izuku Midoriya was its unwilling conductor. Ozone and pulverized concrete were the dominant scents, a gritty perfume that coated the back of his throat. The sounds were worse. The shrill keening of stressed metal, the guttural roar of an unseen gigantomachia, the distant, desperate screams of civilians and heroes alike, and the sickeningly wet thump of Shigaraki's decay turning another city block to dust. Izuku's body was a roadmap of agony. His muscles, supercharged by One for All at 45%, screamed in protest. The tendrils of Black Whip, slick and dark, lashed out from his arms, anchoring him to crumbling buildings as he used float to dance through the air, a frantic, desperate ballet above a battlefield of nightmares. He's pushing too hard, ninth! Daigoro Banjo's voice was a staticky roar in the back of his mind, one of 7 thrumming chords of concern. The recoil is building up. You'll tear yourself apart. I know, Izuku thought, his teeth gritted so hard his jaw ached. But I can't stop. Not now. His eyes, glowing with a furious green light, scanned the maelstrom below. He saw Uraraka, her face grim with determination, touching debris to make it weightless, creating a floating shield wall to protect a group of evacuating civilians. He saw Ida, a silver-blue blur, ferrying the wounded to a triage station. He saw Todoroki, a perfect storm of ice and fire, holding back a squadron of Nomu. They were all fighting their own battles, all pushing past their limits. He had to do the same. His target was a small pocket of the Paranormal Liberation Front, a splinter group led by a villain whose face was a twisted snarl of desperation. His quirk, according to the frantic comms chatter, was Warpgate, an unstable spatial ability that tore holes in reality rather than creating clean portals. He was a cornered animal, and he was standing next to something dangerous. It was a piece of salvage tech, a huge, cylindrical device crackling with blue energy, likely one of Dr. Garaki's failed experiments, or a Detonarat power cell damaged in the fighting. It was venting plumes of iridescent gas, and the air around it shimmered like a heat haze. Don't let him activate it! A hero screamed over the comms. We don't know what that thing does! Izuku didn't need to be told twice. He angled his descent, pulling back his right arm for a smash. Black Whip tendrils snapped from his back, gripping onto the skeletal remains of a skyscraper to slingshot him forward. Manchester Smash! He was a green comet, a blur of righteous fury. But the villain was faster than he looked. With a panicked shriek, he slapped a hand on the side of the volatile machine. If I'm going down, I'm taking this whole damn city with me, his quirk flared. It wasn't a gate that opened, it was a wound. A jagged, vertical tear appeared in the air, not black, but a nauseating swirl of colors that didn't exist in nature. It didn't pull things in like a black hole. It leaked, spewing out gravitational distortions. Cars parked on the street began to lift and buckle. The damaged power cell, overloaded by the spatial distortion, began to scream, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in Izuku's bones. The blue energy from the machine arced, striking the reality tear. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The tears shuddered and expanded, the colors within it churning into a violent vortex. It began to pull. Izuku felt it first as a tug on his costume, then as a physical force yanking him off his trajectory. He fought against it, firing an Air Force blast from his fingertips to try and correct his course, but the vortex was too strong. It was a hurricane of physics gone wrong. Then, through the chaos, he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, who had been separated from her parents in the evacuation. She had tripped and fallen, her face a mask of pure terror as the vortex's pull began to drag her across the broken pavement. There was no time for a plan. There was no room for hesitation. The vestiges screamed in his head, a chorus of alarm, but one voice, gentle and firm, cut through the noise. You know what you have to do, Izuku. Nana Shimura's voice was a whisper of encouragement. His body moved. It always did. He twisted in midair, using Black Whip not to attack, but to anchor. He fired a dozen tendrils into the solid ground around the girl, creating a cage of black energy that the vortex couldn't immediately rip away. He landed hard beside her, his knees jarring. "It's okay. You're going to be okay," he yelled over the deafening roar. He scooped her into his arms, her small body trembling. With every ounce of strength he had left, he threw her. He aimed for the shielded area Uraraka had created, 100 meters away. The girl sailed through the air, a tiny, precious projectile, and he saw Uraraka's eyes widen as she rushed to catch her. A moment of relief washed over him. She was safe. That moment cost him everything. Without the girl's weight, the vortex's pull on him doubled. His black whip anchors groaned, then snapped one by one like overtuned guitar strings. His feet slid across the asphalt, carving deep gouges. The world dissolved into a smear of color and sound. The last thing he saw of his home was Todoroki's horrified face, one side framed by white hair, the other by red, his mouth open in a silent scream. Then the vortex took him. It was not a journey. It was an unmaking. He was shredded into constituent parts, a stream of light and pain and memory. He felt the ghosts of one for all, Joichi's sorrow, the second's pragmatism, Shinomori's kindness, flicker and distort like a failing signal. He was stretched across an eternity in a single second. There was a sensation of immense pressure, of being squeezed through an impossibly small hole, and then a violent, explosive release. Thump. The impact was brutal but strangely soft. He landed on something that yielded with a symphony of clattering metal and squishing, foul-smelling material. The transition from the non-space of the vortex to solid reality was so abrupt it left him breathless. For a long moment, he simply lay there, every cell in his body screaming. His vision was a swimming blur. His ears rang with a low, deep hum that was slowly fading. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling. He was in an alley. A disgustingly filthy one. A dented, overflowing dumpster had broken his fall. The smell was overpowering, a rancid mix of spoiled food, damp brick, and something acrid he couldn't identify. Rain-slicked asphalt reflected the neon glow of a sign he couldn't read. The letters were angular, foreign. "Where?" he rasped, his throat raw. He stumbled out of the dumpster, his tattered costume snagging on a piece of metal. His mask was gone, and one of his armored gloves was missing. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He tried to focus, to reach inward for the familiar, comforting presence of the vestiges. They were there, but they were distant. Muted. It felt like trying to listen to a radio station from another country, full of static and interference. The warm, ever-present glow of one for all in his core felt like a pilot light instead of a furnace. He could feel the power, but it was sluggish, as if it didn't quite understand the rules of this new place. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his adrenaline-fueled haze. He staggered out of the alleyway, leaning against the cold, damp brick wall for support. He was in a city, that much was clear. But it wasn't Muzutafu. It wasn't anywhere he recognized. The architecture was different, older, grander, and more decayed all at once. The cars were bigger, noisier, and the people, they spoke in a language he didn't understand. The sounds were clipped and harsh to his ears, completely alien. He saw signs for grocery pizza and laundromat, but the words were meaningless squiggles. He was adrift in a sea of incomprehensible noise. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he slid down the wall, his head in his hands. All Might. Mom. Everyone. The thought of them, still fighting, still in danger while he was here, was a physical blow. Guilt and fear warred within him, a nauseating cocktail that threatened to drown him. He had to get back. He had to. But how? He pushed the panic down. Analyze. Think. What would a real hero do? Captain Selkie would assess his surroundings. Sir Nighthawk would gather data. All Might would. All Might would find someone to help. But who could he ask? He couldn't speak the language. He looked like he just crawled out of a war zone, which he had. His costume, a symbol of hope and heroism back home, would only mark him as a freak here. He needed to get out of sight, to find a place to think. He pushed himself to his feet, his battered body groaning in protest. He chose a direction at random and began to walk, hugging the shadows, his head down, trying to be invisible. The city was a bewildering labyrinth of sound and light. The sheer number of people was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the deserted, war-torn streets he had just left. He turned down a quieter side street, seeking refuge from the sensory assault. It was darker here, illuminated only by a single flickering street lamp. And it was here, in the relative quiet, that he heard a sound he understood universally, a cry for help. It was a choked, fearful gasp, followed by a low, menacing voice speaking in that alien tongue. His head snapped up. Hero instincts, more deeply ingrained than language or logic, took over. He crept closer to the source of the sound, peering around the corner of a brick building. Under the buzzing lamplight, two figures were cornering a third. The victim was a young man, probably a student, clutching a backpack to his chest. The two aggressors were large and menacing, but it was what one of them was holding that made Izuku's blood run cold. It wasn't a knife or a simple gun. It was a weapon of some kind, a twisted piece of metallic technology that pulsed with a faint blue light. It was asymmetrical, clearly not mass-produced, and had the distinct, otherworldly aesthetic of alien engineering. It looked dangerous. Unstable. The man holding the weapon shoved it against the student's chest. The student whimpered, dropping his backpack. Izuku's body tensed. He was injured. His power felt strange. He was in an unknown land with unknown rules. Intervening was reckless. Illogical. But he's in trouble. That was the only thought that mattered. He took a deep breath, feeling the muted power of one for all begin to stir within him. It felt like coaxing a wet log to catch fire. He settled on a low percentage, something he could control without shattering his already damaged limbs. 5%. He stepped out from behind the corner. The two muggers turned, their faces shifting from predatory confidence to startled confusion. They saw a boy, not much older than their victim, dressed in a bizarre, torn green costume. His hair was an untamed forest of green and black, and his eyes blazed with an intensity that was utterly unnerving. The man with the alien weapon laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He said something in his language, probably a dismissive insult, and gestured at Izuku with the weapon. Izuku didn't need a translation. He took a fighting stance, the one Mirko had drilled into him. Low to the ground, balanced, ready to spring. The second mugger, a mountain of a man, charged. He was big, but he was slow. Izuku sidestepped the clumsy punch with ease, the move so fluid it was almost contemptuous. He chopped the man on the back of the neck, a precise, targeted strike. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a sack of bricks. The weapon-wielding mugger's jaw dropped. He hadn't even seen the boy move. Panic replaced arrogance. He swung the alien weapon around and fired. A bolt of crackling blue energy shot out, searing the air. Izuku, guided by a faint whisper of danger sense, a dull ache behind his eyes instead of the usual sharp spike, leaned back, the bolt zipping past his face, so close he felt the heat on his cheek. It struck the brick wall behind him, exploding with a deafening crack and leaving a molten, glowing crater. Izuku's eyes widened. That was serious firepower. This wasn't a simple mugging anymore. He couldn't hold back. He pushed the power up. 8%. The green lightning of One for All, faint but unmistakable, began to crackle around his limbs. He crouched low. Detroit. He launched himself forward. The pavement beneath his feet cracked from the force of his departure. To the terrified mugger, it was as if the boy had simply teleported. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was right there, his fist drawn back, his face a mask of grim determination. Smash! He didn't aim for the man. He aimed for the weapon. His fist connected with the alien tech. The resulting explosion of force was far greater than he had intended. A shockwave erupted from the point of impact, a visible ripple in the air. A sonic boom echoed through the street, shattering the street lamp above and the windows of the surrounding buildings. The weapon didn't just break, it atomized, vaporizing into a cloud of glowing blue dust. The mugger was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels before landing in a heap, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the tinkle of falling glass. Izuku stood panting in the middle of the street, his arm throbbing. The crater in the wall was smoking. The two muggers were out cold. The student he had saved was staring at him, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Izuku gave him a shaky, reassuring smile and a thumbs up. The gesture seemed to be universal. The student, after a moment's hesitation, snatched his backpack and ran, not even looking back. Izuku's shoulders slumped. He hadn't meant to cause that much damage. The power control in this new place was different. Less predictable. He looked at the devastation, the cracked pavement, the shattered windows, the unconscious bodies. "Oh man!" he muttered to himself in Japanese. "I really messed up." He didn't know that his controlled, 8% burst of otherworldly energy had just lit up a very specific sensor array miles away. He didn't know that in a world without quirks, such a power signature was an anomaly of the highest order, a beacon screaming for attention. He only knew he needed to disappear. He turned to melt back into the shadows, but a voice stopped him. It was female, sharp and clear, speaking in that same foreign language. But the tone was unmistakable. It was a command. He looked up. Standing at the end of the street, silhouetted against the distant city glow, were two figures. One was a young woman with long, dark hair, dressed in a practical purple combat suit. In her hands she held a sleek, high-tech bow, an arrow already nocked and aimed directly at his chest. Her expression was one of intense, calculating focus. Beside her stood a young man with brown hair, wearing a blue and red outfit with a star emblem on his chest and a dramatic headpiece. His hands were glowing with a soft, scarlet energy that danced around his fingertips like living flame. His face was less severe than the woman's, more curious and concerned. Izuku's breath hitched. Their costumes, they were like hero costumes. Faded hopes surged in his chest. Maybe this world had heroes after all. Maybe they could help him. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, trying to look as non-threatening as a kid in a tattered green battle suit standing over two unconscious bodies could. He opened his mouth and asked the only question his tired, confused brain could formulate. "Anatatachi wa pro hero desu ka?" Are you pro-heroes? The archer's eyebrow raised. She exchanged a quick, confused glance with the magic user beside her. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice low and steady, never taking her eyes off Izuku. "I have no idea," the man replied, his scarlet energy flaring slightly. "But I can feel something from him. It's huge. It's like a coiled spring, a whole legacy of power just packed into one person, and he's scared. And lost." The archer, Kate Bishop, took a half-step forward, her bowstring taut. She scanned the scene, the two unconscious thugs, the smoking crater in the wall, the shattered glass, and the strange, powerful boy at the center of it all. He was clearly the cause of the energy spike they had tracked. He was also clearly out of his depth. Her eyes met Izuku's. She saw the exhaustion, the desperation, and beneath it all, an earnest, unwavering sincerity. But she also saw the power radiating from him, a power that had just buckled asphalt with a single punch. She couldn't afford to be careless. With a cool, practiced authority that belied her age, she lowered her bow just a fraction, a silent de-escalation that was still very much a threat. She locked her gaze with his, her voice cutting through the night with absolute clarity. "We're the Young Avengers," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And you have a lot of explaining to do." The journey from the rain-slicked Brooklyn alley was a tense, surreal affair. Izuku walked in the center of their formation, a prisoner who had not been bound. The archer, who seemed to be their leader, walked a few paces ahead, her posture radiating a calm authority that reminded him of Aizawa-sensei. The magic user walked beside him, the scarlet glow from his hands having subsided, though Izuku could still feel a strange, static-like energy humming around the man. Izuku's mind raced, cataloging everything. The name they gave, Young Avengers, echoed in his head. Avengers. It sounded grand, official. Like the top-ranked pro-hero teams back home. Were they a government-sanctioned group? A private agency? Their gear was high-tech but showed signs of wear. The archer's quiver had a scuff mark near the top, and the magic user's boots were scuffed at the toes. They were professionals, but they were clearly active. They were fighters. He tried to keep his panic locked down, channeling it into analysis. He was injured, exhausted, and emotionally shattered, but the core of his being, The part that had filled 13 notebooks with meticulous observations was still working. They led him to a subway station, paying for their fares with a flash of a card. The ride was a jarring, screeching ordeal through dark tunnels. Izuku sat ramrod straight, his hands on his knees, acutely aware of the curious and sometimes fearful glances he was getting from the other passengers. His tattered costume, stained with dirt and possibly blood, was a stark contrast to their normal, everyday clothes. For the first time, he felt a profound sense of otherness, a feeling that went deeper than just being in a foreign country. In a world where everyone had a quirk, uniqueness was the norm. Here, his very existence felt like a deviation. After a long ride, they emerged into what looked like a much wealthier part of the city. The buildings were pristine towers of glass and steel that scraped the clouds. They walked towards a magnificent, older building, a stately mansion surrounded by a high stone wall. It was an island of old-world grandeur in a sea of modern architecture. Izuku recognized the style from textbooks, a piece of history beautifully preserved. A massive, stylized door was carved into the gates. The archer pressed a keypad, and the gates swung open with a quiet hum. As they walked up the path, Izuku saw that the mansion wasn't as perfect as it looked from a distance. One wing showed signs of significant, though expertly repaired, structural damage. A few windows were still boarded up. It was a place with scars. "Welcome to the madhouse," the archer said, the first words she'd spoken directly to him since the alley. She glanced back, her expression unreadable. "Try not to break anything else." They entered through a grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the beams of light slanting through a high, arched window. The air smelled of old paper, polish, and ozone. A massive, circular rug with the same insignia dominated the center of the room. The place felt like a museum, a hallowed ground, but scattered throughout were signs of their own occupation. A duffel bag overflowing with blunt-tipped arrows lay by a marble staircase. A tablet computer was charging on a priceless antique credenza. A half-eaten box of pizza sat on a coffee table next to a book with a strange, runic language on its cover. It was the clubhouse of teenagers who had inherited a kingdom. They led him into a vast, high-ceilinged room that had once been a ballroom or a formal library. Now, it was their command center. A massive holographic display flickered in the center of the room, showing a map of the city. Wires and cables snaked across the floor, connecting modern consoles to the mansion's ancient power outlets. "All right, sit," the archer commanded, pointing to a sturdy-looking chair. Izuku complied immediately. He was suddenly aware of more people in the room. A tall, blonde girl with a cheerful face was tinkering with a piece of wrist-mounted tech. A brawny young man with blonde hair stood protectively near the magic user. And leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, was a young man in a tactical suit with a star and stripes motif. His gaze was the most intense of all, sharp and deeply suspicious. The archer stood before Izuku, her bow held loosely in her hand. "Okay. Let's start with the easy stuff. Who are you? Where did you get that kind of power? And what was that language you were speaking?" Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it. The futility of the situation crashed down on him. He could talk all day, but they wouldn't understand a single word. He looked helplessly from the archer's demanding face to the magic user's more sympathetic one. He tried again, speaking slowly in Japanese. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I don't know where I am. I was fighting, there was a villain, a quirk." The words were useless, just strange sounds to them. Frustration pricked at his eyes. The magic user, Billy Kaplan, stepped forward. "Kate, this isn't working. Let me try something." "What, you're going to read his mind?" The suspicious one, Eli Bradley, scoffed from the wall. "For all we know, he's some kind of alien probe." "I'm not going to read his mind, Eli. That's an invasion of privacy," Billy said, his tone patient but firm. He turned his attention to Izuku, his eyes glowing with that soft scarlet light again. He knelt down so he was at eye level with Izuku, a gesture of disarming kindness. He spoke, and though the words were in that foreign language, the tone was gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you," Billy said, his hands hovering in the air between them. "I'm just going to build a bridge. It might feel a little weird. Just try to relax." Scarlet energy, looking like shimmering, translucent threads, flowed from Billy's fingertips. They drifted towards Izuku, not touching him, but surrounding his head in a delicate corona of light. Izuku tensed, every instinct screaming at him to dodge, but the boy's expression was so open, so devoid of malice, that he forced himself to stay still. He felt a strange sensation, not in his mind, but in his very perception. It was like the moment a radio dial clicks into perfect tune, the static vanishing to be replaced by a clear voice. So if you could just hold still. Billy's voice suddenly resolved in his head, perfectly clear, perfect Japanese. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. He blinked, looking around the room. The archer Kate raised an eyebrow. Did it work, Billy? And Izuku understood her. He understood her perfectly. I can understand you. Izuku whispered, the Japanese words coming out of his mouth, but he knew, somehow, that they were hearing them in their own language. Billy smiled, a look of relief on his face. The scarlet energy faded. Good. It's a spell of understanding. It links the conceptual intent of language, not just the words. It should hold for a while. Kate looked impressed, if only for a second. Okay. Good. Now back to my questions. Start from the beginning. Who are you? Izuku took a deep, shaky breath. Now he could explain. Now they might be able to help. He straightened his back, a student about to give a report. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a student at Yurei High School, in the Hero course. The name meant nothing to them, but the phrase, Hero course, caused a ripple of reactions. The blonde girl, Cassie, perked up with interest. Eli's suspicious glare deepened. A hero course? Kate repeated. Like a school for people like us? Yes, exactly, Izuku said, a flicker of excitement in his voice. In my world, about 80% of the population is born with a special ability. We call them quirks. They can be anything from superhuman strength to being able to talk to animals. Society is built around them. And being a pro-hero is a licensed, government-regulated profession. He spoke for what felt like an hour, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of desperate exposition. He explained the societal structure, the rise of heroism, and its dark reflection, villainy. He spoke of his own quirklessness, his lifelong dream, and the hero who had inspired not just him, but his entire world. There was one hero who stood above all the others, Izuku said, his voice dropping with a reverence that was almost religious. His name was All Might. He was the symbol of peace. When he was around, crime rates plummeted. People felt safe. He was more than just a hero. He was a promise. A promise that everything would be okay. The young Avengers listened, their initial skepticism slowly being chipped away by the sheer, unvarnished sincerity in his voice. They were heroes themselves, but the concept of a society so fundamentally shaped by powers, of a single figure who embodied the very concept of hope, was alien to them. Here, heroes were exceptional, often feared. In his world, they were an institution. Okay, Kate said, processing. So you're a hero in training from a world full of super people. That still doesn't explain your power. That punch you threw back in the alley, that wasn't a fire-breathing quirk, or a talking-to-squirrels quirk. That was on another level. This was the hard part. Izuku's gaze dropped to his lap. My quirk is different. It's called One for All. He explained the nature of the sacred power, the torch passed from one generation to the next. He told them how it stockpiled power, growing stronger with each user, and how it had recently begun to unlock the quirks of its previous wielders. He was careful not to mention All Might's withered form or the power's true, world-altering origins with All for One. Some secrets were too heavy to share with strangers, no matter how helpful they seemed. So you're telling me? Eli Bradley finally spoke, pushing himself off the wall, his voice laced with disbelief. That your power is 8 other people's powers all rolled into one, and it gets stronger every time it's handed down. That sounds convenient. It's not a gift, it's a burden. Izuku snapped back, his head shooting up, his eyes flashing with green fire. It shatters your body if you're not strong enough to handle it. I spent months, years, just training my body to be a worthy vessel. I've broken almost every bone I have learning how to control it. It's a responsibility to everyone who came before me, a promise to carry on their will. His passionate outburst silenced the room. They saw the conviction in his eyes, the memory of real pain. This wasn't some fantasy he'd cooked up. This was his life. Teddy, the brawny young man who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I believe him," he said simply, his voice a low, calming rumble. "No one could fake that." Before the debate could continue, the air in the center of the room shimmered. A five-pointed star, pulsing with blue and white energy, tore open in the fabric of space. It wasn't violent like the vortex that had brought Izuku here. It was precise, controlled. A figure stepped out of the star-shaped portal. She was a young woman with dark hair, wearing a denim jacket with a star-spangled design, and she radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. She took in the scene with a quick glance, the assembled team, the strange boy in the green costume, and her lips curved into a knowing smirk. "Having a dimensional castaway for tea, Kate?" she asked, her voice dry. "Didn't know you were running an inter-universal lost and found now." Kate's shoulders sagged in relief. "America. Perfect timing. This is, well, he says his name is Izuku Midoriya. He's from another Earth." The newcomer, America Chavez, walked a slow circle around Izuku's chair. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned him up and down. Izuku felt like a specimen under a microscope. "She's right," America announced, stopping in front of him. "He's practically buzzing with dimensional static. Smells like ozone and broken physics. And his power source." She tilted her head. "It's weird. It's not localized in his biology like a mutant's X gene, and it's not an external energy source like a cosmic artifact. It feels old. Layered. Like a temporal onion." She looked him directly in the eye. "Kid's not lying. He's a long way from home." The confirmation from their resident experts settled over the room like a weighted blanket. The lingering skepticism evaporated, replaced by a new, more complicated reality. This impossible story was true. "So what do we do with him?" Cassie asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "Can you just punch a hole back to his world, America?" America shook her head. "Doesn't work like that. Finding a specific reality in the multiverse is like finding a single grain of sand on every beach in the world combined. I'd need a lock, an energy signature, a temporal echo, something to aim for. Right now, he's just static." The last sliver of Izuku's hope of a quick return home crumbled to dust. He slumped in his chair, the weight of his situation finally crushing him. He was stranded. The young Avengers began to talk amongst themselves, their voices a low murmur. They were discussing logistics, security, where he would sleep, what he would eat. To them, he had become a problem to be managed. He was an anomaly, a guest, a potential threat. But he wasn't a person, he was a situation, and that's when his old habits kicked in. When he was overwhelmed, when he felt useless, he analyzed. It was his defense mechanism, his way of imposing order on a chaotic world. While they debated his fate, his eyes roamed over them, his mind automatically, subconsciously, beginning to deconstruct them. He saw Kate Bishop, the Hawkeye. No obvious powers, yet she commanded a room of powerhouses. Her strength wasn't physical, it was tactical. Her eyes were constantly moving, assessing angles, noting exits. Her authority came from competence. A non-powered leader in a super-powered world. Like Aizawa. He respected that immensely. He saw Billy Kaplan, the Wiccan. His power was reality itself. Emitter type, but on a scale he could barely comprehend. He could rewrite language with a gesture. But he held himself back. There was a hesitancy in his movements, a fear in his eyes. He was afraid of his own potential. A glass cannon who was terrified of breaking. He saw Teddy Altman, the Hulkling. Standing by Billy. Shapeshifter. Transformation-type quirk. His primary form was one of superhuman strength and durability, but there was a flicker of something else there. Green skin. Izuku's mind raced through possibilities. Cellular regeneration? Density control? He was the team's shield, both physically and emotionally, especially for Billy. He saw Eli Bradley, the Patriot. Enhanced human. Super soldier legacy. He carried himself with a rigid discipline. Every movement was precise. He was the tactician on the ground, the soldier. But his suspicion of Izuku wasn't just caution, it was a deep-seated concern for the legacy he represented. He worried about the integrity of his team, his world. He saw Cassie Lang's stature, size shifter, another transformation type. Her enthusiasm was palpable. She was the heart, eager and brave, but he could see in her stance, the way she shifted her weight, a touch of recklessness. She would likely charge in first, a powerful but potentially predictable opening move, and America Chavez. Her power was the most exotic. Spatial manipulation of the highest order. She wasn't just moving through space, she was breaking it. She was their key, their transport, their ultimate trump card. But her confidence bordered on arrogance. She might rely on her power too much, forgetting that every power has a limit or a counter. Without thinking, his hand went to the utility pouch on his belt. His fingers closed around the familiar, comforting shape of his notebook. It was miraculously intact, though the cover was scorched and the pages were warped from the rain. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. He pulled it out, along with a pen. He opened it to a fresh page and began to write, the pen scratching furiously across the paper. And as he wrote, he began to mutter, Hawkeye, no powers but exceptional skill and tactical acumen, relies on trick arrows, potential vulnerabilities in close quarters against superhuman speed. Wiccan, reality warper, potentially limitless power but held back by psychological blocks. Synergy with Hulkling is primarily defensive. Emotional state is key to his power levels. Hulkling, shapeshifter, base form is a high-level brute strength type, but shape-shifting offers near-infinite versatility. Is he limited to organic forms or can he mimic inorganic materials? Density shifting? Need more data. Patriot, super soldier serum derivative? Enhanced strength, speed, stamina, peak human potential, highly disciplined but maybe too rigid in his tactical thinking, predictable patterns. Stature, PIM particle technology? Mass is conserved or drawn from another dimension? Needs to be careful about structural integrity of her surroundings. Chavez, dimensional travel, also grants superhuman strength and durability. Portals can be used offensively and defensively, redirecting attacks, BFR, but what's her recharge rate? Is there a limit to the number of portals she can open? His muttering, which had started as a low whisper, grew louder, more intense. The team's conversation faltered. They all turned to stare at him. He was completely lost in his own world, his eyes darting between them as he scribbled, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. Is he okay? Cassie asked, looking at Billy. I think he's analyzing us, Billy said, a note of awe in his voice. Kate stepped forward, intrigued. What are you writing? Izuku didn't even hear her. He was on a roll now, the pieces clicking together in his mind. He saw their strengths, their weaknesses, and more importantly, how they fit together, and how they didn't. The core issue is a lack of synergistic application, he muttered, tapping his pen on the page. Hulkling's shape-shifting is being underutilized. It's not just for strength. His heritage, he's an alien hybrid, right? Kree and Skrull. The Skrulls are master infiltrators, perfect mimics. The Kree are a militaristic, technologically advanced race. His biology must be incredibly malleable. Wiccan, your magic is reality manipulation. It's not just shields and blasts. It's code. The universe is code. If you could generate a specific resonant frequency, a magical signal attuned to Hulkling's unique Kree/Skrull DNA. He stood up, pointing his pen at Teddy, then at Billy, his eyes alight with the fire of discovery. You could theoretically use it as a catalyst. You could prompt his cells to temporarily manifest latent Kree characteristics on a micro level. For example, some Kree subspecies have energy-reflective subdermal plating. It's a passive biological trait. Teddy, you probably can't access it consciously because it's not part of your normal shape-shifting repertoire. But Billy, if you spoke to his cells in their own language, with the right magical frequency, you might be able to trigger a temporary transformation. He wouldn't just be a brick. He could become a walking energy mirror, capable of reflecting energy attacks. It would completely revolutionize your team's defensive capabilities against energy-based foes. He stopped, panting slightly, suddenly aware that the entire room was dead silent. All 6 of the young Avengers were staring at him with expressions ranging from dumbfounded shock to utter astonishment. Teddy and Billy were looking at each other, their mouths slightly agape. Could that actually work? Teddy asked Billy, his voice a whisper. Billy's eyes were wide. The magical theory is sound. It would be incredibly complex, a fusion of biological and arcane principles, but I think it's possible. I never would have thought of that. Not in a million years. Eli stared at Izuku, his suspicion completely gone, replaced by a look of grudging respect. He wasn't just a powerhouse. He was a strategist. A brilliant one. America Chavez let out a low whistle. Damn, kid! You're not just an anomaly. You're a freaking supercomputer. But it was Kate Bishop's reaction that was the most profound. She walked over and gently took the notebook from Izuku's hand. She couldn't read the Japanese characters, but she could see the detailed sketches, the diagrams, the arrows connecting different members with notes on combination attacks. It was more than just analysis. It was a blueprint for a better team. She had been struggling for months to get them to function as a cohesive unit, to move beyond being just a collection of powerful individuals. And this kid, this lost, terrified kid from another dimension, had seen the solution in 10 minutes. She looked up from the notebook, her sharp, analytical eyes meeting Izuku's. She saw him not as a problem anymore. Not as a guest or a refugee. She saw him as a key. Midoriya, she said, her voice quiet but firm, a newfound respect coloring her tone. We need to talk. The first few days were a study in suspended animation. Izuku Midoriya existed in the periphery of the young Avengers world, a ghost haunting the grand, echoing halls of their mansion. He slept on a surprisingly comfortable couch in a disused library, the scent of old leather and dust a constant companion. Kate had provided him with a change of clothes, a pair of gray sweatpants that were a bit too long and a faded black t-shirt with a band logo he didn't recognize. Wearing them felt like a second, more mundane costume, one that marked him not as a hero, but as a stray. He spent most of his time in a state of quiet, gnawing guilt. He would watch news reports on their massive television, the English words flowing past him with perfect clarity thanks to Billy's spell, but the content was a source of constant anguish. He saw their heroes, Iron Man, a brilliant man in a suit of armor, Captain America, a soldier out of time, Thor, a literal god, and felt a pang of inadequacy. They were so powerful, so confident. He was just a boy, stranded universes away from a war he was supposed to be fighting. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his friends' faces, twisted in expressions of fear and exertion. Was the battle over? Had they won? Were they even still alive? The not knowing was a poison, seeping into his thoughts and leaving him hollow. The young Avengers, for their part, treated him with a cautious kindness. Cassie would often bring him bowls of brightly colored, sugary cereal, chattering away about her day as if he were a visiting cousin. Teddy and Billy would offer him quiet smiles, occasionally trying to include him in a movie night, though Izuku usually declined, feeling too much like an intruder. Eli Bradley observed him from a distance, his gaze no longer hostile, but professionally analytical, as if Izuku were a complex piece of enemy ordnance he was tasked with disarming. America Chavez was a fleeting presence, appearing and disappearing through her star portals with cryptic remarks and an air of cosmic importance. It was Kate Bishop who interacted with him the most, though her interactions were more like check-ins. She made sure he was eating, asked if he needed anything, and once spent 20 minutes trying to explain the rules of baseball after seeing him watch a game on TV with a look of utter bewilderment. She was the leader, and he was a complex logistical problem she had to manage. He appreciated her consideration, but it only amplified his feeling of being a burden. He tried to make himself useful. He cleaned the common areas, washed dishes, and meticulously organized a pile of Kate's specialized arrowheads that had been scattered across a workbench. He did it all with a quiet diligence that seemed to unnerve the team more than his initial powerful outburst. They didn't know what to do with a quiet, helpful, dimensionally displaced teenager who could punch holes in buildings. On the morning of the third day, the fragile piece of his routine was shattered. He was in the main command center, ostensibly wiping down the holographic display table, but really just trying to stay out of the way. Kate was at the main console, a tablet in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, her brow furrowed as she reviewed what looked like after-action reports. "The damage estimates from the Brooklyn incident are finalized," she announced to the room at large. Eli was methodically field-stripping his shield's magnetic recall unit on a nearby table. Cassie was trying to balance a spoon on her nose. 17 shattered windows, minor structural damage to one building, and a 4-foot section of pavement that needs to be completely repaved. She didn't look at Izuku, but he felt the weight of her words as if she had placed a hand on his shoulder. His jaw tightened. That was his mess. His lack of control. "Total cost is manageable," she continued with a sigh. "Stark Industries' benevolent fund will cover most of it, but it's another mark on our public profile. We need our next outing to be clean." "No exceptions. We're always clean," Cassie protested, the spoon clattering to the floor. Eli didn't look up from his work. "Your definition of clean involves significantly more property damage than the official one, Cass." Suddenly, a piercing siren blared through the room, making Izuku jump nearly a foot in the air. Red lights began to flash along the ceiling, bathing the grand chamber in an urgent, pulsing glow. On the main holographic display, the city map zoomed in on a location downtown, a large, modern building complex. "What is it?" Billy asked, rushing in from the kitchen with Teddy right behind him. "Active threat. Accutech Innovations Expo," Kate said, her demeanor shifting instantly from stressed manager to field commander. She was already typing furiously at the console, her coffee forgotten. "Reports of an armed assailant with advanced technology causing panic and property damage. Police are establishing a perimeter but are outgunned." A live security feed flickered onto the screen. It showed a chaotic scene inside a large exhibition hall. People were screaming and running. In the center of the room, a man in a bulky, dark green armored suit was blasting displays apart with concussive bursts of energy from his gauntlets. The suit was cobbled together, a patchwork of different technologies, but a large, circular device on his back pulsed with a menacing green light. "Doesn't look like AIM or Hydra," Eli noted, having already reassembled his shield. "Too crude. Freelancer, he's after something," Kate observed, zooming in on the villain's movements. "He's not just smashing things randomly. He's moving towards the central dais. The keynote exhibit." She pulled up a schematic of the expo. "The arc resonance capacitor. New energy source. Small, self-sustaining, and powerful enough to run a city block for a month. Or a suit of armor for a lifetime. So, a super battery," Cassie summarized, her earlier goofiness gone, replaced by a determined glint in her eye. "We've got this." Izuku's heart was hammering against his ribs. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was it. This was what he was born to do. A villain. People in danger. He took a half-step forward, his voice coming out as a strained croak. "I can help." All eyes in the room turned to him. Kate looked over her shoulder, her expression firm but not unkind. "Midoriya, no, but I can." "No," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. She stood up and faced him fully. "You are in a world you don't understand. We don't know how your powers will react to our environment long term. You don't have a comms unit, you don't know our protocols, and you are not a member of this team. Your help in Brooklyn cost thousands of dollars in damages and drew a lot of unwanted attention. What you can do is stay here, where it's safe." Her logic was infuriatingly sound. He was a liability. A wild card. He opened his mouth to protest again, to tell her that he had a provisional license, that he'd fought in a war, but he knew it was useless. He was a stranger. She must have seen the crestfallen look on his face, because her expression softened slightly. "Look, I get it. You're a hero. Sitting on the sidelines sucks. But this is our fight, our city. We know what we're doing." She unclipped a small, sleek earpiece from the console and tossed it to him. He caught it reflexively. "You can monitor our comms from here. Be our eyes in the chair if you want. Let us know if you spot anything on the schematics we might miss. That's how you can help." It was a small concession, a bone thrown to a dog to keep it from barking, but it was something. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "Young Avengers, move out!" Kate commanded. They assembled in a blur of practiced motion. Within a minute they were gone, leaving Izuku alone in the silent, red-lit command center. He stood there for a long moment, the earpiece clutched in his hand, feeling more useless than he had when he was a quirkless child. He put the device in his ear. A cacophony of sounds filled his head, the rush of the wind, the hum of their transport, and their voices, crisp and professional. "ETA 2 minutes, Kate's voice said in his ear. "America, you're on insertion. Get us on the roof, north side. Stature, you and Hulkling are on civilian control. Get everyone out. Patriot with me. Wiccan, you're on overwatch. Prioritize containment. We do this clean." "Copy that," came the chorus of replies. Izuku walked over to the console, his movements stiff. He brought the live security feed back up. He could only watch. But if he was going to watch, he was going to analyze. The roof of the Acutech Expo Center materialized around them with a lurch and the scent of ozone as America Chavez tore open a star-shaped hole in reality. They stepped through onto the gravel-covered surface under a gray, overcast sky. Below them, the sounds of chaos were already audible: distant sirens, the rhythmic thumping of the villain's sonic blasts, and the faint screams of the terrified crowd. "Go time," Kate said, knocking an arrow. Their entry was a controlled storm. America flew down, a streak of patriotic colors, landing with enough force to crack the pavement and draw the villain's attention. Cassie grew to 15 feet tall, becoming an instant, unmissable target, and began herding panicked civilians towards the exits with surprising gentleness, her massive hands creating a protective barrier. Hulkling, in his powerful green form, stood guard, deflecting falling debris with his body. Kate and Eli rappelled down the side of the building, smashing through a high window and landing in a crouch on an upper mezzanine overlooking the main hall. "Wiccan, status?" Kate sub-vocalized into her comm. "I've got eyes on him," Billy's voice replied, a slight tremor of nerves audible even over the comms. He was levitating just outside a shattered window, his hands glowing with scarlet energy. "He's making a beeline for the capacitor. Police are holding back. It's just us." The villain, who called himself Feedback, laughed as he saw them. His voice was distorted by his helmet, a grating, metallic sound amplified by his own tech. "The Young Avengers! The JV Squad! Did the real heroes have better things to do?" He aimed a gauntlet at Cassie. "Let's see how the big girl handles a little reverb." A concentrated blast of sickly green sonic energy shot out. Cassie braced herself, crossing her arms in front of her face. The blast hit her with the force of a freight train. She grunted, stumbling back a step, but held her ground. The problem wasn't the force, it was the frequency. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and Cassie cried out, clutching her head. At her size, her inner ears were more susceptible to the disorienting attack. "I got him!" Eli yelled, leaping from the mezzanine. He threw his shield with practiced precision. It flew through the air, a red, white, and blue discus of death, aimed squarely at Feedback's chest. Feedback simply angled his other gauntlet and fired a wide, unfocused sonic wave. The wave hit the shield in midair. Instead of deflecting it, the sonic energy seemed to wrap around it, robbing it of its momentum. The shield wobbled and clattered uselessly to the floor. "My tech doesn't just project sound, you idiots!" Feedback gloated. "It absorbs kinetic energy. Your little toys are useless." From his vantage point, Billy's eyes widened. He began chanting, his hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. "Scutum in silentio, umbra sign voci." A shimmering, scarlet dome of energy formed over the central dais, attempting to contain the villain. Feedback just laughed, and fired a sustained blast at the shield. The sonic energy slammed against the magical barrier. For a moment it held. But then something strange happened. The green energy of the sonic blast seemed to reflect off the shield, travel back to the device on Feedback's back, and then pulse out again, twice as strong. The feedback loop was visible, a shimmering arc of power. "Thanks for the charge, kid!" he roared. The amplified blast struck Billy's shield, and it shattered like spun glass. Billy cried out, thrown backward by the psychic backlash, and was only saved from a nasty fall by Teddy, who leaped up and caught him. Kate cursed under her breath, letting an arrow fly. It was a targeted shot, a classic Hawkeye special, aimed at the villain's knee joint. But feedback was already moving, his suit surprisingly agile. He sidestepped, and the arrow embedded itself in a tech display behind him. This was going badly. Their teamwork, usually a bit clunky but ultimately effective, was completely falling apart. Cassie was disoriented and unable to press the attack. Eli's primary weapon had been neutralized. Billy's defensive magic was literally making the enemy stronger. America was busy running interference, punching portals to redirect blasts away from the few remaining civilians, but she couldn't get a lock on feedback himself. "He's adapting to us," Kate said into the comms, her voice tight with frustration as she ducked behind a kiosk to avoid another blast. "Every move we make, he counters. He's feeding off our energy." They were powerful individuals, but they were fighting as individuals. Cassie's direct approach, Eli's by-the-book tactics, Billy's defensive posture, none of it was working. They were a band playing 5 different songs at once, creating a cacophony of dysfunctional heroism. Back in the mansion, Izuku was on his feet, pacing back and forth in front of the holographic display like a caged animal. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the console. He was listening to every pained grunt, every frustrated curse, every failed plan. He could hear the stress in Kate's voice as she tried to rally her team, the fear in Billy's as his spells failed, the raw frustration in Eli's as he was forced to retrieve his useless shield. "This is wrong," he muttered to himself, his eyes darting between the security feeds and the building schematics he'd pulled up on a secondary screen. "They're all wrong." He wasn't just watching a fight. He was dissecting it. His mind, honed by years of obsessive analysis, was processing information at a frantic pace. He saw what the team, lost in the heat of the moment, couldn't. The villain wasn't just absorbing kinetic energy. He was absorbing all energy directed at him. The sonic waves weren't just a weapon, they were a net. When Eli's shield hit the wave, its kinetic energy was captured. When Billy's magic shield reflected the sonic blast, its arcane energy was captured and added to the loop. They were pouring gasoline on a fire. "He's not a brawler," Izuku whispered, his eyes wide. "He's a capacitor. Just like the device he's trying to steal." His gaze fell on the circular device on feedback's back. It pulsed brighter with each absorbed attack. But Izuku noticed something else. After each major, amplified blast, the light from the device would dim for a fraction of a second. It was a flicker, almost imperceptible. A recharge cycle. A weakness. They were fighting his strength, not his weakness. They were trying to overpower a man whose entire strategy was based on being overpowered. They needed to stop attacking him directly. They needed to disrupt his system. He looked at the team's positions on the map. Kate was pinned down. Cassie was still trying to shake off the sonic disorientation. Eli and Teddy were on the defensive, protecting Billy. America was still playing whack-a-mole with redirected energy blasts. They were separated, isolated, and being picked apart. He saw the path to victory, a clear, shining line through the chaos. It was a complex sequence of actions, a symphony of teamwork that required every single member to play their part perfectly. But it would work. He knew it would. He looked at the comms unit. Kate had told him to monitor. To be their eyes. She hadn't told him to be their voice. Intervening would be a massive overstep of his boundaries. She would be furious. He was the stray, the problem, the guest. He had no right. Then, he heard Cassie cry out in his ear as another focused sonic blast brought her to one knee. He heard Kate's sharp intake of breath. He heard the rising panic in their voices. And in that moment, the choice was gone. He couldn't stand by and watch these heroes get hurt because of a tactical flaw he knew how to exploit. His inner all-might, the part of him that moved before he could think, took over. He grabbed the master microphone on the console, his hand trembling slightly. He took a deep breath. And he broke the rules. "Stop!" His voice, raw and filled with an authority no one had ever heard from him before, blasted through their earpieces. The effect on the battlefield was instantaneous. For a split second, the young Avengers froze. "Midoriya?" Kate's voice was a whip crack of disbelief and anger. "What the hell are you doing on this channel? Get off, there's no time!" Izuku's voice was desperate, pleading, but also unshakably certain. You're fighting him all wrong. You're feeding his power. Every attack you land on him or his shields, he absorbs it and sends it back stronger. Stop attacking him directly. There was a moment of stunned silence on the comms, broken only by the sound of another sonic boom. He's right. Billy's voice came, shaky but clear. My shield, it amplified his power. I felt it. So what do we do, genius? America's Chavez shot back, zipping past Feedback's head. Let him walk out with the capacitor. No! You disrupt his system, Izuku insisted, his eyes glued to the screen. He was no longer a lost boy. He was a field commander. I have a plan. You have to trust me. Please! Kate was crouched behind the ruined kiosk, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to shut him down, to reassert control. But he was right. Their strategy was a catastrophic failure, and there was something in his voice, a certainty that was either insanity or genius. She looked out at her team, scattered and struggling. They needed a new plan. Talk, she bid out. You have 10 seconds to convince me. His power comes from the device on his back. It has a 2-second recharge cycle after every major blast. That's our window, Izuku said, the words coming fast and precise. We need to overload his sensory input, break his balance, and disable him in that window. Everyone has a part to play. Hawkeye Stature, you're up first. Kate made a decision. It was a gamble, a massive one, but her gut told her it was the right one. Okay, kid. Let's hear it. Team, you heard him. New plan. On Midoriya's command, a confused, reluctant chorus of copy came over the comms. Izuku's heart hammered. They were listening. They were trusting him. He couldn't fail. Hawkeye! He commanded, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. The emitter on his right gauntlet. I need you to disable it. Not with an explosive. Use a detonator arrow, something dense, non-reactive, a foam or putty arrow. Something to clog the mechanism. Aim for the aperture. Kate blinked. It was an incredibly specific command. She reached into her quiver without hesitation, her fingers finding the familiar shaft of a containment foam arrow. It was a non-lethal crowd control tool, not something she'd typically use on a primary target. But she trusted the kid's logic. She rose from her cover, drew, aimed, and let fly in one smooth motion. Stature! Izuku's voice came an instant later. Diversion! On his left! Do not attack him! Attack the floor 10 feet in front of him. Use a stomp. I need a shockwave. Cassie, who had been about to try and tackle Feedback, paused. The order was counterintuitive, but it was an order. She lifted her massive foot and brought it down with all her might. Boom! The reinforced concrete of the expo floor cracked, sending a visible shockwave ripping through the ground. The sequence was perfect. The containment foam arrow hit Feedback's right gauntlet just as the shockwave from Cassie's stomp reached him. His balance, already compromised, was completely shattered. He stumbled, his aim thrown off. The sonic blast he was about to fire sputtered, and the foam rapidly expanded, clogging his primary weapon. He roared in frustration and turned to fire with his left gauntlet. Wiccan! Izuku shouted. The capacitor! It's vibrating from the sonic blasts. It's becoming unstable. Forget Feedback, contain the objective. Isolate it from the vibrations. The command galvanized Billy. It gave him a clear, non-violent objective that played directly to his strengths. He wasn't being asked to fight, he was being asked to protect. His hesitation vanished. He flew forward, his hands glowing, and a complex shield of scarlet energy, laced with runes of silence and stasis, formed around the arc resonance capacitor on the dais. The dangerous hum it had been emitting was instantly muffled. Feedback was enraged. His primary weapon was disabled, his balance was shot, and his prize was being shielded. He gathered his energy, drawing on all the power he'd absorbed, and fired a massive, wide-angle blast from his left gauntlet to try and clear the board. The green energy erupted outwards. Izuku saw it coming. The device on Feedback's back glowed brilliantly, and then, for a split second, it dimmed. Now! Izuku roared into the microphone, his voice cracking with intensity. Hulkling! Patriot! Finishing move! Go! It was a two-pronged assault, executed with a brutal efficiency they had never achieved before. Eli Bradley, a blur of red, white, and blue, slid under the sonic blast, his shield held low. He didn't try to block, he used it to slide across the polished floor, coming up right at Feedback's feet. Simultaneously, Teddy, a green juggernaut, charged through the dissipating edge of the blast, shrugging off the energy. He didn't throw a punch. He followed Izuku's implicit instruction, disrupt the system. Eli slammed his shield up into Feedback's sternum, breaking his stance and knocking the air out of him. At the exact same moment, Hulkling wrapped the villain in a crushing bear hug from behind. His massive, invulnerable arms enveloped Feedback, his body completely smothering the device on the villain's back. The feedback loop was broken. Feedback struggled for a moment, but it was over. Hulkling's strength was overwhelming. With his system smothered and his weapons disabled, he was just a man in a suit. With a grunt, Patriot reached up and expertly unlatched the stolen capacitor from the villain's rig, tossing it to America, who caught it with a smirk. The suit powered down, and Feedback went limp in Teddy's arms, unconscious. The fight was over. Silence descended upon the exhibition hall, broken only by the crackle of damaged electronics and the distant, fading sirens. The young Avengers stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily. There was minimal collateral damage. The civilians were safe. The objective was secure. The villain was neutralized. It was the cleanest, most efficient takedown they had ever performed. They stood there for a long moment, looking at the unconscious form of Feedback, then at each other. They hadn't just followed orders. They had moved as one, a single, multifaceted organism. Each action had perfectly complemented the next. It was the kind of teamwork Captain America wrote about in textbooks. The comms, which had been a stream of frantic shouting, were dead silent. Finally, Kate raised a hand to her earpiece, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, laced with an emotion Izuku couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something else, something that sounded like respect. Midoriya, she said, her voice echoing in the silent command center thousands of miles away. How in the hell did you know that would work? Izuku slumped back into the command chair, the adrenaline draining out of him in a sudden, dizzying rush. His entire body was trembling. He looked at the screen, at the victorious heroes standing in the wreckage. He had just taken command of a team of heroes he'd met 3 days ago. In a world that wasn't his. And he had led them to victory. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom in his chest, pushing aside the guilt and fear, if only for a moment. It was a sense of purpose. He hadn't just been a burden. He had helped. He had been a hero. The return to the mansion was a stark contrast to the team's usual post-mission dynamic. Typically, their journeys back were filled with a chaotic energy. Cassie and America might be loudly debating whose takedown was more cinematic. Eli would be stoically critiquing their performance, and Billy and Teddy would be quietly checking on each other. It was a comfortable, familiar noise of friends decompressing after a life-or-death struggle. Tonight, the silence in their Quinjet was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the engines. They didn't look at each other. They were all, in their own way, looking inward, replaying the final moments of the fight in their minds. They had moved with a precision that felt foreign, like borrowing someone else's perfectly trained muscles. The architect of that precision was sitting alone in their command center, an ocean of silence on the other end of their comms. Izuku, for his part, had spent the 20 minutes of their return flight in a state of escalating panic. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. What had he done? He had seized command. He had shouted orders at a team that wasn't his, a team of seasoned heroes, from the safety of an armchair. It was the height of arrogance. Kate had every right to be furious. He had completely betrayed her trust and undermined her authority. He imagined her storming into the mansion, her face a mask of cold fury, telling him to pack his borrowed sweatpants and get out. Where would he even go? He was so lost in his spiraling anxiety that he didn't hear the Quinjet land. The first sign he had of their return was the sound of the heavy doors to the command center hissing open. He flinched, turning from the holographic display where he had been obsessively reviewing the mission logs, his face pale. The entire team filed in. They were still in their gear, their faces smudged with dust and grime from the fight. They didn't say a word. They just stopped a few feet from the console and looked at him. Izuku's heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his ribcage. He couldn't read their expressions. They were a mixture of exhaustion, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. He braced himself for the inevitable explosion. He bowed his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm sorry!" The words burst out of him, a torrent of frantic apology in Japanese, flawlessly translated by Billy's spell. "I know I overstepped. It was insubordinate and reckless. I had no right to interfere. I saw an opening and I acted without thinking about the chain of command or your authority, and I completely understand if you're angry. I'll accept any punishment. I couldn't watch you get hurt. I'm so sorry." He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the verdict. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. He risked a glance upward. Kate Bishop was standing at the front of the group, her arms crossed. Her face was an unreadable mask. She was staring at him, not with anger, but with an intensity that felt like she was trying to see straight through him. The rest of the team seemed to be waiting for her to speak, to set the tone. Finally, she let out a long, slow breath. "Sorry?" she repeated, her voice quiet but carrying across the cavernous room. "You're sorry?" Izuku flinched. "Yes, don't you dare apologize." She cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp, but not with anger. It was with something else. Frustration. Disbelief. She took a step forward, gesturing around the room with one hand. "Look, Midoriya. This team, we're a mess. We're a bunch of superpowered kids trying to fill shoes the size of skyscrapers. We've got a little god in training, a Kree-Skrull emperor, a girl who can punch holes in reality, and we still manage to fight like a bunch of toddlers in a sandpit half the time." She began to pace, the words spilling out of her now, a dam of long-held frustration breaking. "I'm the leader. Or I'm supposed to be. But leading them is like trying to herd cats. In a hurricane. On fire. I'm a good archer, I'm a decent strategist, but I'm always in the fight. I'm dodging, I'm shooting, I'm trying not to get flattened. I can't see the whole board. I'm just trying to play my one piece." She stopped in front of him, her gaze locking onto his. "Tonight we were losing. Badly. We were getting our asses handed to us by a C-list tech villain because we were sloppy. We were disorganized. We were 5 individuals fighting the same guy, not a team fighting a battle. And then you came on the comms." Her voice softened, losing its hard, frustrated edge and gaining a note of genuine awe. "You weren't in the fight. You were above it. You saw everything. You saw his weakness, you saw our strengths, and you saw a path to connect the two that none of us could have imagined. You didn't just give us orders. You gave us a symphony, and you made us the instruments. We just had to play our notes." She gestured to the mission report still displayed on the holotable. 0 civilian casualties. Minimal property damage. Target apprehended in under 7 minutes from first contact. That's not our record. That's not even in the same sport as our usual record. That's professional. That's Avengers level. Izuku could only stare, his mind struggling to process her words. This wasn't the lecture he had been expecting. This was praise. Cassie Lang, unable to contain herself any longer, rushed forward, a wide, irrepressible grin on her face. "It was amazing! The way you called out that stomp and foam combo? It was like something out of a comic book." "So cool, she's right," Teddy added, a rare, wide smile on his own face. He clapped a hand on Billy's shoulder. "I've never felt so in sync with everyone before. It was like we all knew what the other was going to do before they did it." Eli Bradley, the ever-stoic patriot, gave a single, sharp nod. It was, for him, the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Your tactical assessment was flawless. You identified the threat, isolated the core variables, and implemented a multi-stage counter-offensive that exploited the enemy's primary asset. It was textbook." Izuku felt a blush creeping up his neck. He looked from face to face, seeing nothing but genuine admiration and gratitude. His frantic, panicked intervention hadn't been seen as insubordination. It had been seen as leadership. Kate stepped forward again, her expression serious. The rest of the team fell silent, sensing the weight of the moment. She had come to a conclusion during the flight back, a risky, radical idea that had solidified with every mile they traveled. It was crazy. It was unprecedented. And she was absolutely certain it was necessary. "We have a problem, Midoriya," she said, her voice low and direct. "This team has all the power in the world, but we lack cohesion. We lack a unifying tactical mind in the field. I've been trying to be that person, and I've been failing." She took a deep breath, a moment of startling humility from the usually confident hero. "What we need is a field leader. A strategist. Someone who can see the whole board and tell the pieces where to go. Someone who can make us more than the sum of our parts." She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "Until we figure out how to get you home. I think it should be you." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Izuku's brain short-circuited. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. The words echoed in his head, nonsensical and overwhelming. Leader? Him? The concept was so utterly alien, so laughably impossible, that for a moment he thought he had finally succumbed to the stress and was hallucinating. "Me?" He finally managed to squeak out, the word thin and reedy. "Yes, you," Kate confirmed, her expression unyielding. The dam of Izuku's self-doubt, a structure he had been building his entire life, burst with catastrophic force. He shot to his feet, his hands waving in front of him in a gesture of frantic negation. "No! No, 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 absolutely not! I can't, I'm not, you don't understand," he stammered, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. He began pacing, his movements jerky and agitated, his muttering habit returning with a vengeance. "I'm not a leader. I'm a student. A first year. I just got my provisional license a few months ago. I'm not even the class representative. Ida is the class rep, he's a much better leader, so calm and decisive, and Yayorozu is the vice rep, she's a genius, her strategic planning is on a whole other level. She would have seen feedback's weakness in the first 30 seconds. He gestured wildly at the team, his eyes wide with a sort of panicked reverence. "You're the young Avengers. You're real heroes. In a world with Captain America, the greatest strategic leader in modern history. The symbol of heroism for generations. And Iron Man and Thor and All Might. A leader is someone like them. They're pillars. They're symbols. They inspire hope just by showing up. I'm just me. I'm just a kid who breaks his bones and mumbles a lot. I can analyze things, sure, but that's not leadership. That's just a hobby. Putting me in charge would be an insult to all of you, to the legacy you're trying to build." His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving. He was genuinely, deeply horrified by the suggestion. In his mind, a leader was a perfect, unshakable figure like All Might. He was a follower. A soldier. A hero, yes, but one who took orders, not one who gave them. He was defined by his admiration for other, greater heroes. The idea of standing in their place, even temporarily, felt like blasphemy. The young Avengers watched his meltdown with a mixture of surprise and dawning understanding. They had expected him to be hesitant, perhaps, but not to have a full-blown crisis of confidence. Cassie took a hesitant step forward. "But you were so confident on the comms. You sounded like you knew exactly what you were doing." "That wasn't confidence, that was panic," Izuku exclaimed, whirling to face her. "I was terrified you were all going to get hurt, and the plan just came out. It was a desperate gamble, not a strategy." This was the core of it. They saw a brilliant tactician. He saw a terrified kid who got lucky. Kate opened her mouth to argue, but it was Billy Kaplan who stepped forward, his expression gentle and empathetic. He had been quietly observing Izuku, sensing the powerful currents of insecurity and self-loathing that churned beneath his heroic exterior. It was a feeling he understood all too well. "Izuku," he said softly, using his first name for the first time. The intimacy of it made Izuku pause in his frantic pacing. Billy's eyes held a wisdom that seemed beyond his years. Maybe your idea of a leader is a little skewed. He glanced around at his teammates, a small, sad smile on his face. We all grew up in the shadow of giants. Captain America. Thor. My parents. The weight of that last word hung in the air. We all feel like we're just kids playing dress up. We're all terrified of not being good enough, of not living up to the legacies we've inherited or the standards they set. He turned his gaze back to Izuku, his voice full of a profound sincerity. A leader isn't someone who thinks they're worthy. A leader isn't some perfect, flawless symbol on a poster. A leader is someone who sees the best in their team and knows how to bring it out. A leader is someone who inspires others not just with speeches, but with their actions, and most importantly. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. A leader is someone who puts the team's safety and the mission's success above their own pride or their own fear. He gestured back towards the hollow table. Tonight you did all of those things. You didn't think about whether you were worthy of giving orders. You saw we were in trouble, and you put our safety first. You saw our potential, the teamwork we were capable of, and you showed us how to unlock it. That's leadership, Izuku. Whether you believe it or not, Billy's words struck a chord deep inside Izuku, bypassing his frantic intellectual defenses and hitting him right in the heart. Putting the team's safety first. That was the core of All Might's philosophy. It was the first lesson of being a hero. He hadn't been thinking about being in charge. He had just been trying to save them. Was that what leadership really was? Not a title you earned, but a responsibility you took on because you had to? He looked around the room again. Cassie was nodding enthusiastically. Teddy gave him a thumbs up, his expression one of solid, unwavering support. Eli's arms were still crossed, but the hard line of his jaw had softened. He still looked skeptical, but it was the skepticism of a soldier evaluating a new CO, not dismissing him out of hand. He conceded Billy's point with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. America Chavez, leaning against the far wall, gave a slow, deliberate clap. Kid's got a point, Green Bean, she said, her tone laced with its usual dry wit. You got the brains. We got the brawn. Seems like a decent division of labor to me. Izuku looked at Kate. She hadn't moved. Her expression was still serious, still waiting for his answer. She wasn't asking him to be Captain America. She wasn't asking him to be a symbol. She was asking him to be what he had been for 10 minutes over a calm channel, a strategist. A lifeline. The idea was still terrifying. The weight of responsibility felt immense, a physical pressure on his shoulders. But looking at their expectant faces, at the trust they were so willingly offering him, another feeling began to surface, a flicker of determination. He was stranded here. He couldn't help his friends back home. But maybe he could help these people. Maybe this was how he could be useful. Maybe this was how he could earn his keep, how he could repay them for their kindness. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the last of his panicked energy draining away, leaving him feeling exhausted but clear-headed. I don't know if I can do it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was an honest admission of his fear. I've never led anyone before. None of us knew what we were doing when we started either, Kate replied, her voice softening. We learn on the job. That's the gig. She offered a small, tired smile. We'll be your training wheels. Izuku looked down at his hands. The hands that had broken themselves over and over again to grasp a power he felt he didn't deserve. The hands that had scribbled endlessly in notebooks, trying to understand a world of heroes he could only watch from the sidelines. Now that world, or a version of it, was asking him to lead. He took another deep breath and looked up, meeting Kate's gaze. His own eyes, which had been wide with panic just moments before, were now clear and resolved. He wasn't the leader they deserved. He wasn't All Might. He wasn't Captain America. But he was here. And they needed him. Okay, he said, his voice quiet but steady. On a trial basis. A wave of relief washed over the room. Cassie cheered. Teddy's smile widened. Kate's own tense posture finally relaxed, and she gave him a nod of genuine gratitude. Good, she said. That's all I'm asking. She paused, a smirk playing on her lips. Now get some sleep, Captain. Your first official briefing is at 0800, and it's going to be about why leaving half-eaten pizza boxes in the command center is a tactical liability. For the first time since he had been ripped from his own world, Izuku Midoriya felt a small, genuine smile touch his own lips. It felt foreign but good. He was terrified. He was overwhelmed. He felt like a complete and utter fraud. But for the first time, he wasn't just a stray. He was part of the team. He had a job to do. Izuku's new role as trial captain did not begin with a grand ceremony or a formal transfer of command. It began at 0600 the next morning with the insistent, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of an arrow hitting a target, echoing from a vast, high-ceilinged chamber deep within the mansion. When Izuku, drawn by the sound, peered into the room, he found Kate Bishop, already in workout gear, methodically firing arrows at a series of moving targets in a state-of-the-art training hall. "You're up early, Captain," she said without turning, loosing another arrow that hit a drone the size of a dinner plate dead center. I couldn't sleep," Izuku admitted, stepping into the cavernous space. It was a hero's paradise. Part gymnasium, part obstacle course, part advanced combat simulator. "This place is incredible. It's the old danger room," Kate explained, finally turning to face him. Her face was slick with a light sheen of sweat, her expression focused. "Stark refurbished it for us. Mostly. Half the time the sentient volcano setting still tries to order a pizza." She gestured with her bow towards the rest of the room. "So, you're the big shot strategist now. What's the plan?" Her tone was light, but the challenge was clear. It was one thing to call plays from a chair. It was another thing entirely to build a team from the ground up. Izuku's nervousness was a cold knot in his stomach, but he pushed it down. This was familiar territory. This was what he did. He pulled out a fresh notebook, one Kate had given him from a stash of office supplies, and clicked his pen. "The plan," he said, his voice gaining confidence as he slipped into his analytical mindset, "is to stop training you as individuals, and start training you as a unit. Your individual skill levels are already incredibly high. But your synergy is reactive, not proactive. We need to change that." Thus began the most grueling and unorthodox training regimen the young Avengers had ever experienced. Izuku, drawing on 4 seasons of UA's punishing curriculum, the relentless drills of Aizawa, the foundational combat lessons of All Might, the rescue ethics of Cementos, transformed their casual sparring sessions into a systematic deconstruction and reconstruction of their entire fighting style. He started not with fighting, but with them. He spent the entire first day conducting one-on-one interviews, filling his notebook with pages of meticulous script. He didn't just ask about their powers, he asked about their limits. What was the heaviest thing Teddy had ever shape-shifted into? How long could Cassie hold her giant form before getting fatigued? What was the most complex concept Billy had ever tried to turn into a spell? What was the farthest America had ever punched a portal? How many trick arrows could Kate carry? And what was the precise area of effect for each one? He asked questions they had never even thought to ask themselves. Then, the physical training began. His first partner was Kate. He met her in the training hall, dressed in his own borrowed workout clothes. She stood with her bow, looking skeptical. "All right, Midoriya. What's first? You gonna teach me how to punch through a wall?" she quipped. "No," Izuku said seriously. "You're going to teach me," Kate blinked. "Teach you what?" "How to shoot. You don't have a bow." "No. Teach me how you fight," he clarified. "You and I are the most similar," she laughed. "Kid, you have the power of 8 people inside you. I have pointy sticks. We're not similar, we are," Izuku insisted. "Take away my quirk, and what am I? I'm a fighter who has to rely on tactics, momentum, and predicting my opponent's moves because I can't afford to take a direct hit. Take away your arrows, and what are you? The same. We're the ones on the team who have to think our way through a fight with a powerhouse, not just endure it. Our powers don't make us durable. Our wits do." His insight struck a chord with her. It was a truth she had always felt but never articulated. She was the normal one, the baseline human. But he saw that not as a weakness, but as a different kind of strength. She nodded slowly. Okay. I see your point. So what's the drill? Spar with me, he said, settling into a low fighting stance. No quirks for me, no arrows for you. Hand to hand only. I need to understand your rhythm, your instincts. What followed was a masterclass in skill versus instinct. Kate was the more polished fighter, her movements economical and precise, a beautiful dance of judo throws and sharp, targeted strikes taught to her by the best. But Izuku was a brawler, his style forged in the crucible of actual life-or-death combat against villains who wanted to kill him. He was faster, his reflexes honed by danger sense, and his movements, while less refined, were explosive and unpredictable. He didn't fight like a duelist, he fought like a survivor. She would trap his arm in a joint lock, and he'd use the leverage to flip them both over. He'd rush in for a strike, and she'd use his momentum to send him sprawling. They were remarkably evenly matched. They pushed each other, learning, adapting. He learned the subtle tells in her posture that telegraphed her next move. She learned to anticipate his explosive bursts of speed, realizing he fought in patterns learned from observing dozens of other pro heroes. After an hour, they were both breathless, leaning against the wall, nursing their respective bruises. Okay, Kate panted, a grin on her face. Okay, you're not just a powerhouse. You can move, and you don't need your arrows to be dangerous, Izuku replied, rubbing his shoulder where she'd landed a particularly sharp blow. He scribbled in his notebook. We need to work on our synergy. Your role is crowd control and precision strikes from a distance. My role is close quarters disruption. If we can coordinate our movements, we can create a pincer effect that can lock down any single opponent. They spent the rest of the day in the simulator, running drills. She would call out targets, and he would use his speed to herd simulated enemies into her line of fire. He would use Black Whip, at a low, controlled level, to create tripwires, and she would use smoke arrows to mask their position. They were learning to communicate not with words but with action. A bond of mutual respect, forged in sweat and bruises, was forming between the team's official leader and its new, reluctant captain. His session with Eli Bradley was a completely different affair. It took place not in the gym, but in the mansion's vast, quiet library. Eli stood before a holographic display showing grainy, black and white footage of Captain America in World War II, his shield a blur of motion as he single-handedly took on a Hydra platoon. He never wasted a single movement, Eli said, his voice full of a deep, almost painful reverence. Every step, every block, every throw, it was perfect. Economical. Powerful. It was the embodiment of tactical perfection. Izuku stood beside him, watching the footage. He understood. This was Eli's all might. My power, it comes from my grandfather, Isaiah Bradley, Eli explained, his gaze distant. He was one of the first. A super soldier. A hero this country created and then tried to forget. I carry his legacy, and Steve Rogers, he represents the ideal. The symbol. I have to live up to both. One for all is a legacy too, Izuku said quietly. It's the will of 8 people entrusted to me. The first user, he was quirkless, like I was. He was frail, but he had a powerful sense of justice. The 7th user, my mentor's master, Nana Shimura, she smiled, even when things were hopeless, because she believed that heroes had to save people's hearts, not just their bodies. He looked at Eli, his eyes earnest. Carrying a legacy is heavy. You feel like any mistake you make dishonors them. Eli looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a strange anomaly from another world, but a kindred spirit. He saw another young man buckling under the impossible weight of the heroes who came before. Yes, Eli breathed, the single word carrying a universe of meaning. Their training was a meeting of minds. They didn't spar. They ran tactical simulations. Izuku would create scenarios on the holotable, a bank robbery with hostages, a bomb disposal on a moving train, a battle against a foe who could teleport. For hours, they would debate strategy, moving holographic icons around the map like chess pieces. Eli was a brilliant tactician, a soldier through and through. His plans were direct, efficient, and built around minimizing risk. Izuku, however, was a Yui student. His thinking was more lateral, more heroic. Your plan to secure the perimeter is sound, Eli, Izuku would say, pointing at the map. But you've allocated all our resources to neutralizing the threat. What about civilian rescue? What about collateral damage? A hero's first priority isn't to defeat the villain, it's to save the innocent. He would then propose a radical alteration to the plan, a riskier move that put the team in more danger but guaranteed the safety of the hostages. Eli would argue back, citing percentages and probable outcomes. Their debates were fierce but respectful. They were two different schools of heroic thought colliding. Eli was the shield, focused on defense and containment. Izuku was the fist, focused on decisive, selfless action. Slowly, they began to find a middle ground. They learned to temper each other's instincts, creating strategies that were both tactically sound and heroically compassionate. Eli began to see the value in taking calculated risks for a greater good, and Izuku learned the importance of having a fallback plan, of thinking 3 steps past the initial heroic charge. They weren't just planning for a fight. They were defining the very philosophy of their team. The training with Billy Kaplan was perhaps the most challenging and the most rewarding. Izuku found him in the mansion's solarium, surrounded by ancient, leather-bound books of magic. A small, perfect, glowing scarlet butterfly was fluttering around his head before dissolving into harmless sparks. Billy was the team's soul, but he was also its most terrifyingly powerful member. He was a reality warper on a cosmic scale, a boy who could theoretically rewrite the universe with a single, badly phrased wish, and it terrified him. "I'm afraid of it," Billy admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "This power. When I was younger, I didn't have control. I wished things into existence. Bad things happened. I unmade things. I'm always so scared that if I let go, even for a second, I'll break everything. So I hold back. I stick to shields, simple blasts. Things I can control." Izuku listened patiently. He thought of Eri, of her devastating rewind quirk that she saw as a curse. He thought of his own power, how it had shattered his bones again and again. He understood the fear of a power that felt bigger than you were. "Your quirk, your magic," Izuku said carefully. "It isn't an enemy, Billy. It's a part of you. Like an arm or a leg. You just haven't learned how to use it properly yet." He pulled out his notebook. "At Yuri, they teach us that control comes from understanding. We do exercises. We break our quirks down into their component parts and practice each one separately." He proposed a new kind of training. No grand spells. No reality-bending feats. They started small. Incredibly small. "Change the color of this leaf," Izuku said, holding out a leaf from one of the potted plants. Billy waved a hand, and the leaf turned a vibrant, shimmering blue. "Good," Izuku said. "Now, just change the color of the veins. Leave the rest of it green." Billy frowned in concentration. He focused, muttering a few words, and slowly, painstakingly, the delicate veins on the leaf shifted from green to a thread like gold. It took him nearly a minute, and beads of sweat formed on his brow. "That was hard," Billy panted. "That's the point," Izuku said, a small smile on his face. "That's control. It's not about how big a shield you can make, it's about how precise you can be. It's magical fine motor skills." For days, they practiced these microspells. Izuku had him change the temperature of a cup of water, 1 degree at a time. He had him levitate a single grain of sand. He had him create a sound, not a blast, but a single, perfect C-sharp note that held for exactly 10 seconds. It was frustrating, tedious work. But slowly, something in Billy began to shift. He was treating his magic not as a terrifying, unpredictable ocean, but as a tool, a delicate instrument he could learn to master. The fear in his eyes was gradually being replaced by a quiet, focused confidence. He was learning that the greatest expression of his power wasn't in its magnitude, but in its precision. Izuku was teaching him to be a surgeon, not a demolitions expert. The final pairing was with America Chavez. This was less a training session and more a joint research project. They convened in a lab in the mansion's sub-basement, a place of gleaming chrome and humming machinery that was clearly Tony Stark's handiwork. "All right, Green Bean," America said, leaning against the console with a characteristic swagger. "You've tuned up everyone else. What's my deal? You want me to punch smaller, more precise holes in reality? I want to understand your power, Izuku said, gesturing to a diagnostic scanner. And I think you're the only one who can help me understand mine. Or at least, how I can get home, he explained his theory. One for all is a power passed through time. You travel through space. When I came here, the connection to the vestiges, the previous users, became weak and distorted. When I fought feedback, their voices were clearer. When I used 100% against that villain who sent me here, the energy discharge was immense. There's a connection between my power, raw energy output, and dimensional stability. America's nonchalant demeanor dropped, replaced by a keen, scientific interest. A temporal power creating interspatial ripples. That actually makes a twisted kind of sense. You're not just a battery, kid, you're a temporal tuning fork. When you resonate at your highest frequency, you might be pinging your home dimension. The implications were staggering. To get home, he might need to unleash a level of power he could barely control, one that could level a city block. It was a terrifying, dangerous prospect. So, what's the plan? Izuku asked. The plan is data, America said, her eyes gleaming. We need to see what your power looks like on a dimensional level. She had him power up, slowly, incrementally. 1%, 5%, 8%. America, using her own innate senses and the lab's advanced equipment, monitored the energy he was putting out. It's weird, she muttered, staring at a wildly fluctuating graph on a monitor. It's not clean energy. It's noisy. It's full of echoes. Ghosts. I'm seeing 8 distinct residual energy signatures layered on top of yours. The vestiges, Izuku breathed. Whatever you call them, they're what makes your power signature so unique, she confirmed. And so unstable in this reality. Our universe's physics keeps trying to correct the anomaly. That's why your connection feels faint. The universe is trying to sand down your edges. They worked for hours, theorizing, experimenting. America would open a small portal, and Izuku would project a tiny pulse of one for all into it. They watched how the portal shimmered and distorted, how the energy reacted to the raw fabric of the multiverse. They didn't find a way home, but they found something just as important, a path for their investigation. And in the process, Izuku began to understand the sheer, mind-boggling scale of America's power, and she began to respect the strange, temporal depth of his. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the mansion had transformed. The quiet, awkward tension was gone, replaced by a thrumming, focused energy. The team moved with a new purpose. They were communicating more, anticipating each other's needs. Izuku hadn't just trained them, he had connected them, forcing them to understand each other on a fundamental level. He had become the heart of the team, the central node through which all their disparate energies flowed. He wasn't just their captain, he was their translator, helping the archer understand the reality warper, helping the soldier understand the powerhouse. But their newfound cohesion was about to face its first, brutal test. It happened late one evening. The team was gathered in the common room, enjoying a rare moment of downtime. Cassie was telling a story that had Teddy and Billy laughing, Eli was reading a history book, and Kate and Izuku were playing a game of chess. A surprisingly even match of her calculated strategy against his unpredictable, pattern-seeking mind. Suddenly, every light in the mansion went out. The emergency power kicked in a second later, casting the room in a grim, red glow. Alarms, far more severe than the one from the Accutech Expo, began to blare. What was that? Eli asked, already on his feet, shield in hand. On the main command console, which had rebooted to a backup system, a single image appeared. It was a humanoid figure, encased in sleek, futuristic armor of purple and green. His face was blue, his eyes glowing with a cold, ancient intelligence. He sat upon a throne that seemed to be floating in a vortex of temporal energy. A voice, calm, cultured, and utterly chilling, echoed through the room's speakers. It was not broadcast from a local station. It felt as though it was being spoken directly into their minds. Greetings, anomalies, the team froze. They had seen this figure before, in historical files, in the Avengers' most classified databases. He was a nightmare from the future, a being of immense power and intellect. I am Kong, the voice continued, a hint of amused curiosity in its tone. And I have come for a piece of property that has unfortunately found its way into your possession. The holographic image of Kang zoomed out, and a secondary image appeared beside his throne. It was a swirling, green ball of energy, filled with faint, ghost-like figures. It was the energy signature of One for All. Kang's cold, digital gaze seemed to fall directly on Izuku. I am a conqueror of time. And that power you wield, little paradox, that wonderful, temporal Ouroboros that devours its own past to strengthen its future. It is the most fascinating key to the timeline I have ever encountered. A sleek, silver robot, its head a single, glowing red eye, materialized in the center of their common room. It rose to its full 8-foot height, its metallic limbs unfolding with silent, deadly grace. It was not made of any metal they recognized. It shimmered, as if it were not entirely in their time. I will have it, Kang's voice declared, devoid of all emotion save for the cold certainty of a collector claiming a prize. Turn over the boy, and I will allow your insignificant timeline to continue its plodding journey towards oblivion. Refuse, and I will prune it. The robot's single red eye flared to life. It raised a hand, which morphed into a gleaming, futuristic cannon. The young Avengers, their week of training, of finding harmony and strength, had just come to a sudden, terrifying end. Their first test as a true team was here. And it was not a C-list villain, it was a temporal god.